Hi, in this video we're going to take a look at another pipelining pattern. In a previous video we introduced the idea of patterns with the WDL as keyword, where we were able to execute a defined task more than one time, either in the same WDL script or in a sub-workflow. And that's a pattern that I use pretty frequently. The most frequent pattern, though, is the linear pipeline, and this is what it looks like. So you can see at the bottom of the screen here, you have 3 steps or tasks, and you have input and output. And the output from each task goes in as input to the subsequent task. This is, like I said, the most common pattern that I use when working with WDL pipelining. There are others, but we're going to take a look at this now, and we'll look at it in both the execution environments in the GCE instance and also in Terra. Before we do that, though, we're going to look at the actual example script in a little bit different way than we've done to date. And here I am inside of the editor that I like to use for a number of things, including WDL, which is VS Code. So one of the techniques I use when I'm both understanding and explaining code that is a little bit longer, won't fit on a screen, is I just collapse sections of it because it helps me to trace through the code. So I'm going to do that here. So you can see we've got a workflow called Say It Twice on line 3, and it's working with a variable that's defined at the level of the workflow. That's a string name. So we can collapse that once we're aware of that. And we'll see if we look at the tasks as they're defined. The first task is right greeting, and this is going to be really familiar when we call it. We're just assigning a variable that's assigned at the level of right greeting to the value of the variable defined at the workflow. Really nothing new here, and if we open up right greeting, there's really nothing new. This is the same example we've been working with all along. The only thing that you would want to note here is that you have a variable on line 28, so you'll need an input JSON file to define that. And then on line 31, the output is called output_name, and that's important to know. So right greeting output is called output_name. Now where it gets interesting is the second task. Again, we're passing in the output of the first task, so how do we do that? So let's look at the call first. On line 13, we have the written name, which is set equal to, from the first task, right greeting, the output name. So that's how we do it, basically. Now, what does read it back to me look like? And how is written name used? Let's go ahead and look at that. And you can see that we have a task level variable called written name defined on line 38. And on line 39, we have the original name, which is a string, parsed using the WDL method readString, passing in the written name. And then we're echoing back the original name, and the output is, from read it back to me, the repeated name. So now if we go up to the output of the workflow, notice the output of the workflow is read it back to me, repeated name. So let's take a look at what executing this in the different environments looks like. So first, if we run this on our VM, notice we're passing in a JSON file, linear.json, with the original value of name. And you can see that we had a success here, and the final output is Say It Twice out file, and basically it is read it back to me on standard out, and we have the workflow succeeded. Now let's look at the execution of this on the Terra environment. So what I've done in advance is I use find a workflow, and I set up an example of this workflow calling it linear. Now the one difference for the Terra environment is, and you may remember this from a previous video, there is a requirement that there is a declaration in the runtime section for each task for Docker. So I have these examples up on GitHub. That's the only difference between the one I just ran and this one, and that's for both tasks, so you can see Docker. Also, I've run this a couple of times, and so we do have call caching turned on, so it's going to take advantage of call caching and come back more quickly this subsequent run than it would on the first time. So if I click on Inputs, you can see here's say it twice, and I'm just passing in the string value. And then notice that the original name and string are italicized, and it says optional here because it's an optional value. Now if I click on Run Analysis, and then I click on View to take me to the job history. Wow, that came back super fast. So you can see the input is here, and here's the output. It fetched it out of cache. And this task is still running. So let's refresh this. And it came back already as well. So here's the input to it, and here's the output. Also, you may remember from previous videos, you can see the timing diagram, and you'll be able to see each of the actions. So you can verify, for example, that call cache was actually used, and you can see how long each of the tasks took. So this is a really common pattern in pipelining, this linear pattern, and passing the results of one task to another task. Once again, happy pipelining.